On the opening night of my first solo art exhibition, the culmination of a decade of my life's work, my family gave my sister the microphone to announce her six-figure NFT deal. They literally dimmed the spotlight on my paintings to shine it on her. I watched as they toasted her success with the champagne I had paid for. But I didn't cause a scene. The next morning, however, when they walked into the gallery, they found a locksmith changing the locks and a legal notice taped to the glass door that would shatter their world as completely as they had shattered mine. They say an art gallery is a sacred space, a quiet cathedral for culture, where light and shadow play on canvas, and every piece tells a story. The Thorn Gallery was more than that to me. It was my inheritance, not of money, but of soul. It was my grandfather's legacy, a dusty, beautiful old building in the historic district that smelled of turpentine, old wood, and forgotten dreams. He'd left it to the family, but I was the only one who had ever truly loved it. For 15 years, I was its keeper. I was the one who patched the leaking roof, who refinished the worn oak floors by hand, and who spent lonely nights under a bare bulb, meticulously restoring the gilded frames of paintings no one else seemed to remember. I am a painter, a traditional one. I work with oils, with pigments I mix myself, with canvases I stretch until my knuckles are raw. My art is slow, deliberate, and quiet. It doesn't scream for attention. It waits to be felt. My family never quite understood it. To them, the gallery wasn't a sanctuary. It was a prop. It was a source of quaint, artistic prestige that gave them something interesting to talk about at dinner parties. My father, a retired accountant, loved to call himself a patron of the arts. My mother, who never picked up a brush in her life, enjoyed the title of gallery curator, a role that mostly involved her rearranging my studio to be more aesthetically pleasing when her friends came over. And then there was Chloe, my younger sister. Chloe was a supernova in a world where I was a distant, flickering star. She didn't paint. She created content. Her canvas was a glowing tablet, her medium was digital, and her success was measured in likes, shares, and the fleeting explosive fame of the internet. She was brilliant at it. I couldn't deny that. Her work was bright, loud, and perfectly packaged for a world with a short attention span. And my parents adored it. They saw her as the future, the evolution of the Thorn legacy. They saw me as the dutiful, reliable caretaker of its past, the foundation that holds up the shiny new skyscraper, essential but invisible. I told myself I didn't mind. I told myself we were a team, that her success was the family success. I was the roots. She was the blossom. It's a beautiful metaphor, until you realize the roots are starving in the dark, while the blossom gets all the sun. The financial reality of the gallery was a secret I kept like a sin. It hadn't turned a real profit in years. The neighborhood had changed. Tastes had shifted. The money to keep the lights on, to pay the property taxes, to buy the very supplies I used to create my art, it came from me. I had a small anonymous side business, selling commissioned portraits online to clients overseas. It was a grueling, soul-crushing grind, painting other people's pets and smiling children, while my own artistic voice grew hoarse from screaming into the void. I poured every spare dollar from that secret work back into the gallery. When the ancient HVAC system died one sweltering July, it was my savings that paid for the 5-figure replacement. My parents celebrated the new quiet air conditioning by hosting a party. When Chloe's high-end tablet cracked, my father used the gallery account, which was, in reality, my account, to buy her the newest, most expensive model. An investment in our rising star, he'd called it, ruffling her hair. I didn't say a word. I just went into my studio and scraped the last of the ultramarine blue from a nearly empty tube, wondering if I could afford to buy another one. The resentment wasn't a sudden storm. It was a slow rising tide. It was in the little things. It was my mother taking down one of my landscapes, a piece that took me 3 months to complete, to hang a massive, glossy print of Chloe's latest digital creation. "It just has so much more energy, darling," she'd said, not even looking at me. It was my father suggesting I postpone my planned solo exhibition, the first of my entire career, because Chloe had a potential collaboration with a fashion blogger, and we needed to keep the gallery walls clear for opportunity. I had to fight for my show. I had to present it like a business proposal, with spreadsheets and projections, just to claim a small corner of the space that was supposed to be my home. I was a tenant in my own life. I was paying all the bills for a house where I was treated like the hired help. And the worst part? I let them, because I believed that one day my moment would come, that my quiet, steady work would finally be seen, that my solo show would be the day they finally turned to me and said, "We see you. We are proud of you." I was so wrong. The night of the opening was electric. For the first time, the gallery felt truly mine. Every wall was adorned with my work. There were my brooding seascapes, my intimate portraits, my quiet still lifes. Each one was a piece of my soul, a year of my life. I had hung the lights myself, arranged the flowers, and chosen the soft classical music that drifted through the air. People came, critics I respected, fellow artists, old friends. They walked through the rooms, their voices hushed with appreciation. Someone called my use of light masterful. Another praised the emotional depth of a portrait. For a few precious hours, I felt seen. I felt like an artist. Then came the time for speeches. My father tapped a glass, a practiced charming gesture. He spoke warmly about the Thorne legacy, about his father's dream. He called me his dedicated, talented daughter, and invited me up to say a few words. I stood there, my heart pounding, a small, handwritten speech clutched in my hand. The light was warm on my face. I looked out at the sea of smiling faces, and for a second, I thought, this is it. It was worth it. I opened my mouth to speak. "Thank you all so much for being here. This collection is about..." That's as far as I got. "Excuse me, darling. Just one moment." My mother's voice cut through the air, sweet as cyanide. She glided up to the small podium, taking the microphone from my hand before I could even register what was happening. "Before Elara continues, we have some incredibly exciting family news that we simply cannot wait to share." She turned to my sister, her face lit up with a blinding, ecstatic pride I had never once seen directed at me. "Chloe, dear, why don't you tell everyone?" Chloe stepped forward, practically vibrating with energy. She was wearing a metallic silver dress that caught the light, making her look like a celestial event. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice boomed with triumph. "Oh my God, you guys! I couldn't say anything until it was official, but I just signed a deal with Omnicorp. They're buying my Cyberflora series as a limited edition NFT collection and featuring it in their global Art of the Future campaign. It's a 6-figure deal." The room exploded. The polite, artistic applause for my work was nothing compared to this. It was a roar. People surged forward, surrounding Chloe, their phones held high to capture the moment. My father, beaming, walked over to the lighting controls on the wall. With a flick of a switch, he dimmed the spotlights that had been carefully aimed at my paintings and turned up a harsh, bright floodlight directly on Chloe, making her the undeniable center of the universe. The champagne I had bought for my celebration was suddenly being popped open and passed around to toast her victory. The quiet classical music was drowned out by someone playing a celebratory pop song from their phone. I stood there, just outside the circle of light, my unfinished speech still in my hand. No one looked at me. No one noticed I was even there. I had become a ghost at my own party. The air grew thick with congratulations for Chloe. A visionary. The next big thing. You're changing the game. I watched my mother hug her, tears of joy streaming down her face. I watched my father pat her back, his chest puffed with pride. They were a perfect, shining family unit in the spotlight, and I was in the shadows where I had always been. But this time, the darkness felt different. It wasn't just lonely. It was cold. It was absolute. And in that cold, something inside me finally, irrevocably, snapped. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. A strange glacial calm settled over me. I watched them, an anthropologist observing a foreign tribe. I saw the critic who had praised my work, now eagerly asking Chloe for her social media handle. I saw my aunt, who had told me my seascapes reminded her of our summers at the coast, now taking a selfie with Chloe, the flash glaring off the silver of her dress. My moment hadn't just been stolen. It had been erased, overwritten by something shinier and more valuable. My gaze drifted to the corner of the room, to my favorite piece in the entire collection. It was a painting of my grandfather in his studio, his hands covered in paint, a look of serene focus on his face. It was called The Keeper. It was the heart of the show, the heart of me, and perched on the corner of its ornate, hand-restored frame was a half-empty flute of champagne, a coaster. Someone had carelessly left it there, condensation dripping down onto the 100-year-old wood. That was it. It wasn't the grand betrayal, but the small, thoughtless sacrilege. It was the physical proof of their disregard. They weren't just ignoring my art. They were disrespecting its very soul. Without a word to anyone, I slipped through the celebrating crowd. I walked over to the painting, carefully picked up the champagne flute, and set it on a nearby table. Then, with a reverence no one else in the room possessed, I lifted the Keeper off the wall. The painting was heavy, substantial. It felt like I was rescuing a living thing. Cradling it in my arms, I walked out of the main gallery space, through the hallway, and into my small, cramped studio at the back. No one stopped me. No one even noticed I was gone. I placed the painting gently on my easel. The room smelled of linseed oil and solitude. It smelled like home. The muffled sounds of the party of Chloe's triumph felt a world away. My back ached, my feet throbbed, but my mind was a diamond, sharp and clear. I wasn't sad anymore. I was done being sad. I picked up my phone. I didn't scroll through social media to see the posts already tagging Chloe. I opened my contacts. My first call was to a man named Arthur Vance, my grandfather's estate lawyer, a man I hadn't spoken to in years. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice steady. "It's Elara Thorne. I need to ask you a few specific questions about my grandfather's will, the parts pertaining to the gallery building itself." My second call was to the top commercial real estate agent in the city. My third was to a 24-hour locksmith. I wasn't just reacting. I was dismantling. I was taking the foundation they had stood on, the foundation I had dutifully maintained, and I was turning it to dust. They thought I was the quiet, reliable caretaker. They had forgotten that the caretaker is the only one who knows where all the keys are buried and which walls are load-bearing. And I was about to bring the whole house down. You see, this wasn't about one stolen moment. It was about a lifetime of them. People think these things happen overnight. A single grand betrayal that fractures a family. But it's never like that. It's a death by 1,000 cuts, a slow erosion of self-worth until you're standing on a cliff edge you didn't even realize you were approaching. Looking back, I can see the pattern was always there, woven into the fabric of our family from the very beginning. I remember when I was 10 and Chloe was 8. We both entered the town's youth art fair. I spent a month meticulously drawing a hyper-realistic charcoal sketch of our old dog, Buster. I captured every wiry hair, the sad wisdom in his eyes. It won an honorable mention for technical skill. Chloe, on the other hand, had thrown a bucket of neon paint at a canvas an hour before the deadline and called it emotional explosion. My parents framed her piece and hung it in the living room. They told me my drawing was very nice, dear, but that Chloe's had a certain raw, untamed genius. I remember my father saying, "You have the craft, Elara, but Chloe has the soul." I was 10 years old, and I learned that my effort was worth less than her impulse. As we grew older, the disparity became a chasm. When I needed new oil paints, my mother would sigh and check the prices, telling me to make do with what I had. But when Chloe wanted a new subscription to a suite of expensive digital art software, my father called it a necessary professional expense and paid for it without a second thought. I was the hobbyist. She was the prodigy. I spent my teenage weekends in the dusty gallery basement, learning how to restore frames from old library books, patching plaster, and learning the scent of wood glue and varnish. Chloe spent her weekends at trendy workshops on digital marketing and building a personal brand. My work was silent and solitary. Hers was loud and public. Guess which one they valued more? The first time I sold the painting to a real collector, a small landscape for $500, I was ecstatic. I ran home to tell them. My mother's first response was, "Oh, that's wonderful, honey. We can finally fix the plumbing in the guest bathroom." There was no celebration for me. My achievement was immediately absorbed into the family's needs, my money becoming our money. The very next week, Chloe got over 1,000 likes on a digital cartoon she'd posted on Instagram. My parents took her out to the fanciest restaurant in town, to celebrate her burgeoning career. I stayed home, eating leftovers, the $500 already spent on a plumber. I learned that my actual tangible success was a utility, while her virtual, intangible attention was a victory. It was a quiet, constant bleeding. My needs were always secondary, my contributions assumed. When the gallery's insurance premiums went up, I took on 3 extra portrait commissions, working until 3 a.m. for a month to cover the cost. They never asked where the money came from. They just expressed relief that the gallery account could handle it. They had no idea I was the gallery account. They lived in a comfortable illusion I painstakingly maintained, believing the gallery was a self-sustaining entity of prestige, when in reality it was a financial black hole, and I was the only thing stopping it from collapsing entirely. I tried to tell them once. About 2 years ago, I sat them down and showed them the numbers. The real numbers. The pathetic sales figures. The mounting bills. The tax notices. I showed them my own bank statements. The transfers I was making every single month just to keep the doors open. My father had squinted at the papers, confused. "Well, business has its ups and downs," he'd said with a dismissive wave. My mother had looked at me with a pained expression. "Elara, please," she'd said, her voice laced with disappointment. "Don't be so sordid. Your grandfather didn't build this place to be about money. He built it to be about art." They didn't want to see the truth. They wanted the beautiful story. And I, the ever-dutiful daughter, was the engine of that story, hidden away in the dark, shoveling my life into the furnace to keep their fantasy warm. They weren't just blind. They had chosen blindness. They had looked at my sacrifice and called it an ugly spreadsheet. That was the day I stopped trying to explain. I started planning instead. That's when I first contacted Mr. Vance, the lawyer. Just a preliminary query. I needed to understand the legal structure of my grandfather's will. He had been a wise, thoughtful man. He loved me, and he loved Chloe, but he wasn't a fool. He knew who had varnish under her fingernails and who had stardust in her eyes. The answer he gave me was a seed. A small, hard kernel of truth that I buried deep inside me. The gallery business, the name The Thorn Gallery, was left to the family as a partnership. But the building itself, the physical brick-and-mortar structure, the land it stood on, he had left that directly and solely to me. I was their landlord, and they had never paid a single cent of rent. I held that knowledge for 2 years. I never acted on it. I told myself it was a nuclear option, a failsafe I would never need. I thought if I just worked harder, painted better, gave more, eventually they would see. The solo show was meant to be my final desperate bid for their validation. Its spectacular failure wasn't an ending. It was a liberation. It was the permission I needed to finally press the button. The next morning, the silence in the gallery was profound. The party debris had been left where it fell. Empty glasses, crumpled napkins, a stray silver streamer clinging to one of my frames. They hadn't bothered to clean up. Of course they hadn't. I was supposed to do that. I was always the one who cleaned up the mess. I stood in the center of the main room, holding a folder of documents. The new locks on the front door gleamed in the morning light. I had already let the locksmith out the back. At 9:15 a.m., exactly when my father always arrived to oversee things, I saw his car pull up. My mother and Chloe were with him. They walked to the front door, chatting, laughing about something Chloe had read on her phone. My father inserted his key into the lock. It didn't turn. He frowned, jiggled it, tried again. A look of annoyance crossed his face. "Damn thing's stuck," he muttered. He knocked on the glass. I didn't move. I just watched them. Chloe rolled her eyes, bored. "Dad, just call a locksmith." My mother peered through the glass, and that's when she saw me. And then she saw the piece of paper taped to the door. Her brow furrowed. She squinted, reading the words. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Arthur, what is this?" My father and Chloe looked at the notice. I could see the exact moment the words registered. My father's face went from confusion to disbelief to a dark, stormy red. Chloe just looked baffled, like she was trying to solve a puzzle that made no sense. He rattled the door handle, his knuckles white. "Elara, open this door right now!" he bellowed, his voice muffled by the thick glass. I walked slowly to the door, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. I didn't open it. I just stood a few feet away. On my side of the glass, a queen in my silent, reclaimed kingdom. "What is the meaning of this?" My mother shrieked, her voice thin and shrill. "This is a legal notice of partnership dissolution," I said, my voice calm and even, amplified slightly by the acoustics of the room. "And a notice to vacate the premises." "Vacate?" Chloe sputtered, laughing a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Vacate what? We own this place." "No," I said, looking directly at her. "You own a share in a failing business. I own the building." The silence on the other side of the glass was deafening. My father stared at me, his mouth hanging open. It was a look I had never seen on his face before. Pure, unadulterated shock. The patriarch, the patron of the arts, had just been informed that he was, in fact, nothing more than a tenant. That's not possible," my mother stammered, shaking her head in frantic denial. "Your grandfather would never—" "Grandfather was a very smart man," I interrupted. "He knew who loved the art and who loved the idea of it. I have called a formal partnership meeting for 10 o'clock. My lawyer will be here. You can wait in the cafe next door until he arrives." My father slammed his palm against the glass. The sound made me flinch, but I held my ground. "You will not do this, Elara. This is our family's legacy." "No," I said, my voice dropping, imbued with the weight of 15 years of silent resentment. It was his legacy. It became my burden. You all turned it into a stage for your own vanity. The show is over, and I am closing the theater. I looked at Chloe, at her expensive dress, now slightly wrinkled from the night before, at the look of utter bewilderment on her face. "Your Omnicorp deal is very impressive, Chloe," I said, and for the first time, I allowed a sliver of ice into my voice. "You'll have no trouble affording your own studio space. I hear the market is excellent for renters right now." I turned my back on them then. I walked away from the door, leaving them standing on the sidewalk, a baffled, furious little tableau of a family, locked out of a fantasy they never realized was built by someone else's sacrifice. I went to my studio, put on a pot of coffee, and sat down in front of the keeper. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I was waiting for my lawyer. The gallery was quiet, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the silence of possibility. It was the sound of a space, finally, truly, becoming my own. The meeting was a bloodbath, but not in the way you might think. There was no shouting, no thrown objects. It was colder than that. A clinical dissection of a family under the fluorescent lights of my lawyer's conference room. Mr. Vance, a man who seemed to be made entirely of tweed and quiet authority, laid out the documents one by one. The deed to the building in my name. The gallery's financial statements for the last 5 years, showing a consistent, steep loss. My personal bank records showing the exact amounts I had funneled in to cover the shortfalls. My father stared at the spreadsheets, his face pale. "I don't understand these numbers," he kept muttering, as if the columns of red ink were a foreign language. He, the retired accountant, couldn't comprehend a financial reality that didn't align with his narrative. My mother adopted a strategy of wounded martyrdom. "After all we've done for you," she whispered, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "We gave you a home, a place to create your art. We gave you everything." "You gave me a leaky roof and mounting debt," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "I gave myself a place to create. I paid for it." Chloe was the one who finally erupted. She slammed her hands on the table. "This is just jealousy," she accused, her voice sharp with indignation. "You can't stand that I'm successful, that I made it big while you were just pottering around with your dusty old paintings. You're trying to punish me for my success." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time without the fog of familial obligation. I saw a young woman who was incredibly talented at marketing herself, but who had no concept of the labor that had supported her. "Punish you?" I said with a small, weary laugh. "Chloe, this has nothing to do with you. Not really. Your success didn't cause this. It just illuminated what was already broken. You were the final symptom of a disease I've been living with for years. You think your deal is what this is about? Last night, someone used a 100-year-old frame, a piece of my history, of grandfather's history, as a drink coaster for the champagne I bought to celebrate the work I did. That's what this is about. It's about a fundamental lack of respect so profound you don't even see it. You stand on a foundation, and you never once think to look down and see who's holding it up." Mr. Vance cleared his throat. "The legal situation is straightforward," he said, cutting through the emotion. "Elara is dissolving the partnership, as is her right. The business assets, which, I'm afraid, are minimal after debts are settled, will be divided according to the partnership agreement. The building is her sole property. She is listing it for sale, effective today. The finality of it hung in the air. For sale. Not to be saved, not to be renegotiated. To be sold. Erased. The fallout was immediate and predictable. In the week that followed, I was bombarded. First came the emotional appeals. My mother left long, tearful voicemails about family and forgiveness, and how could I be so heartless. My father tried a different tactic, attempting to appeal to my logic. "Think about the legacy, Elara. You'll be throwing away a century of Thorn history." He didn't seem to grasp that he was the one who had devalued that history into a meaningless brand name. Then came the flying monkeys. Aunts, uncles, distant cousins I hadn't heard from in years started calling. They'd all heard my mother's version of the story, that I, in a fit of jealous rage over Chloe's success, had suddenly and cruelly decided to sell the family's beloved gallery out from under them. "Your sister is a rising star. You should be supporting her," one uncle lectured me. "Family helps each other climb. They don't pull the ladder out from under them." I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just said, Thank you for your concern," and hung up. Chloe took to social media. She didn't name me, of course. She was too savvy for that. She posted a series of cryptic, emotional stories about family betrayal and the dark side of the art world. She talked about having her creative roots torn out and having to rise from the ashes. Her followers ate it up, flooding her with messages of support. She weaponized her victimhood into content, and I had to admit, she was damn good at it. The most painful part was clearing out the gallery. The building sold shockingly fast to a development group that wanted to turn it into a high-end boutique hotel. They made an offer so far above market value I couldn't refuse. While the lawyers handled the paperwork, I had to pack up 15 years of my life. I boxed up my paints, my canvases, my half-finished projects. But I also had to pack up my grandfather's things. His old easel, his paint-stained smock that still hung on a hook, his collection of art books with his notes scribbled in the margins. Each object was a memory, a ghost. My family never came to help. They sent a moving company to collect their few personal items, a cold and impersonal transaction. They didn't want the old things, the dusty things, the things that smelled of history and work. They just took what was shiny. In the end, after the partnership's debts were paid, their share of the business assets was laughably small, a few $1,000s each, a pittance. Chloe's big NFT deal? It turned out to be more hype than substance. A first payment was made, but the wider market for NFTs was already collapsing. The global campaign never materialized. Her viral fame was a flash fire that had already started to cool. Without the gallery as her physical headquarters, without my money silently funding her brand, her momentum stalled. I used my portion of the money from the sale of my building, to buy a small, beautiful warehouse space in an up-and-coming industrial district. It had high ceilings and incredible natural light. There was no history there, no ghosts. It was a blank canvas. I spent a month just cleaning it, painting the walls white and installing new lighting. I built my own studio in the back and a small, elegant gallery space in the front. I hung a simple, hand-painted sign over the door. It didn't say Thorn. It said Phoenix Studio. The first few months were lonely. The silence was overwhelming at times. I had amputated my family, and I was learning to live with the phantom limb pain. But there was a new kind of silence, too, a peaceful one. I could work for hours without interruption, without the low-grade hum of resentment in the back of my mind. My art started to change. It became bolder, more confident. The colors were brighter. I decided to host an opening. Not a big, splashy one, but a small, quiet event for the few people who had stood by me. On that night, as a handful of true friends and fellow artists walked through my new space, looking at my new work, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in my entire life. Late in the evening, a well-known local gallery owner, a woman I had admired for years, approached me. She was standing in front of the keeper, which I had hung in the place of honor. "I followed the story of the old Thorn Gallery," she said quietly. It was a shame to see it go. I braced myself for a lecture, but it never came. She looked at me, then back at the painting of my grandfather. "He would be proud of you," she said. "Not for saving his gallery, but for saving his art. And your own. That takes more courage than anything." Tears welled in my eyes, the first I had shed through the entire ordeal. They weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of relief. She saw it. She saw the truth. The lesson in all of this isn't about revenge. If you want revenge, you're still tied to the people who hurt you. You're still letting them dictate your emotions. This was about liberation. I learned that family isn't an unconditional monolith. It's a relationship, and like any relationship, it requires mutual respect, effort, and care. When a relationship becomes parasitic, you have a right to end it, no matter what title the other person holds in your life. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to burn a legacy to the ground, especially if that legacy is threatening to bury you alive. You have to be willing to walk out of the smoke and ash, alone, and start building something new, something that is truly your own. My foundation isn't brick and mortar anymore. It's my own 2 feet, standing on ground that I cleared, in a space that I built, surrounded by work that I love. And from here, the view is finally clear. It's been 2 years now. Phoenix Studio is thriving, not in a loud, explosive way, but in a quiet, sustainable one. I have a small but loyal base of collectors who value my work. I teach oil painting classes on the weekends. My art is honest. My life is my own. I don't grind myself to dust for anyone. I have enough. For the first time, I am enough. As for my family, I hear things through the grapevine. My parents moved into a small condo. My father's retirement savings weren't as robust as they'd pretended. My mother is reportedly very unhappy with the quality of their new social life. Chloe is still trying to make it as a digital artist, but without the family name and gallery to back her. She's just another voice in a very crowded room. They have never reached out to me, and I have never reached out to them. The silence is a wall, but now it feels like a protective one. Sometimes I wonder if I was too harsh, if there was another way. But then I remember the feeling of standing in that spotlight as it was dimmed, the sight of a champagne flute on my grandfather's frame, and the sound of my own voice being silenced. And I know I did the only thing I could do. I chose to save myself. I chose my own art, my own sanity, and my own future over their comfort and their illusions. And that is a choice I will never regret. So I'm putting this out there for anyone who has ever felt invisible in their own life. For anyone who has been told their quiet contribution doesn't matter as much as someone else's loud success. What do you think? Did I do the right thing? Have you ever had to make a choice between your family and your own survival? Let me know your story in the comments below. I think we have a lot to talk about.